Coming up on Network Africa, former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi buried hours after he collapsed and died in court. A court in Kenya decides the fate of 4 people held over their roles in the 2015 massacre of 147 students at Garissa University. Plus, UNICEF says children were used as suicide bombers in a triple suicide attack in Borno, northeast Nigeria on Sunday. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboali. We begin today in Egypt, where former President Mohamed Morsi has been buried hours after he collapsed in court and died on Monday. His lawyer says the former leader was buried in eastern Cairo early this morning with his family present. The 67-year-old had been in custody since his removal from office in 2013.
Former Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi died on Monday after he fainted in court following a hearing. Morsi, a top figure in the Muslim Brotherhood, who was the first democratically elected president in Egypt's modern history, had been in jail since he was toppled by the military in 2013 after mass protests erupted against his rule. He was sentenced to death in June 2015 in connection with a mass jailbreak during Egypt's 2011 uprising, but this was overturned in 2016. The former leader, however, continued to serve a 20-year prison sentence for a conviction arising from the killing of protesters during demonstrations in 2012 and a life sentence for espionage in a case related to the Gulf state of Qatar. He had denied the charges. While confirming his death, state television reports say 67-year-old Morsi was in court for a hearing on charges of espionage emanating from suspected contacts with the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas. On Facebook, his son Ahmed Morsi says the former president was buried alongside other senior figures of the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo. The burial was attended by members of the family in Cairo's Nasra city after authorities refused burial in Morsi's home province of Shakiyah in the Nile Delta.
Meanwhile, the Muslim Brotherhood says the death of former President Mohamed Morsi on Monday was a murder, and the group has asked Egyptians to gather for a mass funeral. In a statement on its website, the Brotherhood also called for crowds to gather outside Egyptian embassies around the world. Also condemning the news of Morsi's death is the head of Jordan's Islamic Action Front, Morad Adele, who blamed the Egyptian leadership for the tragedy. Adele, Secretary General of the political arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, says a crime had been committed against the former Egyptian president. In addition, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan hailed the former Egyptian president as a martyr who lost his life fighting for his beliefs. Speaking at a meeting in Istanbul, Mr. Erdogan paid tribute to his fellow Islamists, saying history will never forget the tyrants who put him in prison. Let's get more on this story now from the VOA's Edward Yeranayan, who joins us live from Cairo. Ed, thanks for joining us on the program. So what's the mood like in Egypt at the moment? How are people reacting to Mohamed Morsi's death?
Well, Tenny, I asked a lot of people this morning knowing that I would be asked, and the common answer I got was that people were sad that he died, and they used the sort of the Arabic, common Arabic expression, Allah yarhamu, and a lot of people also told me that they thought he was, he got a raw deal. But they were not people who support the Muslim Brotherhood, and I think what they meant that he got a raw deal was that it was the other leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood who really deserved to be punished more than he did, and he wasn't even the original choice to be president. The Muslim Brotherhood had originally wanted one of its more senior leaders, Khairat Shatter, to be the president, but he was disqualified, and he is on trial with was on trial with President Morsi as well. So I mean, he didn't get treated any better really, but I think most people think that Morsi really paid the price for the other leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mm. Well, human rights groups have called for an impartial investigation into this death alongside the Muslim Brotherhood, Turkey and also Jordan. How is the Egyptian government reacting to this demand?
Well, the BBC Arabic service, which appears to be supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, go figure, anyway, they were interviewing people who were pro-government and pro-Muslim Brotherhood. The government stalwarts from Cairo, one of them probably said it better than I could put it. He said that Egypt will not allow anything that will cause, I've been trying to translate into English, impinge on its sovereignty. I think a lot of Egyptians feel that way, certainly ones who are older and who have lived under the British and who remember the British Raj here in Egypt. It goes deep into the brain of many Egyptians that they don't want to be told what to do. But beyond that, I think that Mr. Morsi, most people think he's past history in terms of being a political figure and having any sway on the political equation on the ground here right now. And I think the Muslim Brotherhood is mostly based outside of Egypt, and they have some wishful thinking that they're going to be able to stir up more riots and disorder by having a funeral in the center of Cairo, which, well, that's not where they wanted to have it anyway. But there is a precedent for that. Back in the 60s, a very well-known Egyptian prime minister died, and they allowed a funeral, and something like 1.5 million people came, and they chanted slogans against the president, Abdel Nasser, who was not pleased. I think that's the reason they don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah. But Ed, what would you say are some of his legacies? What do you think he will be remembered for?
Sadly, I don't think he'll be remembered positively, because what he tried to do was to impose an Islamic constitution on the country, and that didn't sit well with any of the major powers in the country, with the military, with the judiciary, with the liberals, with the Christians. So I don't think that will be remembered well. His constitution obviously didn't go over well. That's the reason you had the few million people protesting towards the end of his rule. And in terms of being a popularly elected prime minister, I'd have to point out that he was elected by 51% to 48.8, something like that, as I recall, since I was here at the time. That's a win, but it wasn't a big win. And certainly after he was toppled, the Muslim Brotherhood became even more unpopular. So I don't know that he'll be remembered in a positive light. Although, looking back on it, there are a lot of freedoms that people had in that brief year that evaporated afterwards. So even though I think he was trying to put the lid on freedoms with his Islamic constitution, I think during that period, just by the nature of the revolution, we did experience some liberties that have sort of vanished since then.
All right, then, VOA's Edward Yerine, and it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining us on Network Africa. Now, in East Africa, a Kenyan court is due to sentence 4 people charged with carrying out an attack on Garissa University in which nearly 150 people were killed. Gunmen from the Islamist militant group Al-Shabaab stormed the university in April 2015, killing 147 people. The siege ended nearly 15 hours after gunmen shot their way into the Garissa University College campus in a pre-dawn attack, sparing Muslim students and taking many Christians hostage. Most of the charges the suspects are facing are punishable by life imprisonment under Kenyan laws. The UN's children's charity UNICEF has released more details of the triple attack in Borno State, northeast Nigeria on Sunday, saying that children were used as suicide bombers in the attack. At least 30 people were killed and over 40 others were injured in the incident, which, according to UNICEF, was carried out by a boy and 2 girls whose ages are yet unknown. The attack happened outside a hall where people were gathered to watch television in the town of Konduga. According to UNICEF, 5 children have been used in suicide attacks since the beginning of the year, while in 2018, 48 children were used as human bombs, including 38 girls. Meanwhile, the UN humanitarian coordinator in Nigeria, Mr. Edward Callon, has condemned the multiple blasts. While condoling the families of the victims, the UN and its partners deplore what he described as acts of violence and called for those responsible to be swiftly brought to justice. Lawyer and human rights activist Yvonne Benson Idahosa joins us live on the program to further discuss this. Thanks for joining us on the program, Yvonne. So what do you make of UNICEF's reports that children were used as bombers in Sunday's horrific attacks in Borno State?
I think it's Nelson Mandela that says that there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. And so for me, it's morally reprehensible, right, that terrorists can use the vulnerability and the innocence of children as human bombs in a war that they never signed up to play. But it's also equally as morally reprehensible and an abuse of power, I think, for our leadership not to protect and to serve the most vulnerable in our society, and that is our children.
As is the norm, the government has commiserated with the families of the victims and promised to bring the perpetrators to justice. But UNICEF says 5 children have been used in suicide attacks since the beginning of the year, while in 2018, 48 children were used as human bombs. What can be done to curb this ugly trend?
I think we have to start to move from a place of sending our thoughts and prayers, sending our thoughts, our prayers, our promises, to really move to sending our actions, to sending our financial backing, not just for the vulnerable in this area, which certainly includes children, but also for our armed forces, right, that are there to defend and protect our country. I think another thing that's important is that we have to start to speak the truth, because at least give the vulnerable people in this area an opportunity to protect themselves, right? Because we can't continue to say that Boko Haram has been tactically defeated or been degraded or technically, or using terminology that encourages people to return to a state of normalcy. I think we have to start to speak the truth and protect our children by providing security, by ensuring that everything that our leadership would do for their own children is done for these vulnerable children.
Yeah. Sadly, Yvonne, out of the 48 children used as human bombs in 2018, 38 of them were girls. What can Nigeria do to protect the girl child?
The reality is that these wars are fought on the bodies of women and girls. When it comes to rape, when it comes to trafficking, to child brides, child marriage, forced labor, all of it is fought on the backs of these girls. Women and girls bear the brunt of war. I think what we have to start to do is really make a determination that we're going to prioritize women and girls. We can't continue to render them soft targets. We need to provide not just the security, but also the education, the economic opportunities and empowerment that will ensure that they're not actually vulnerable to the kind of radicalization that leads to these atrocities.
All right, then, lawyer and human rights activist Yvonne Benson Idahosa, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the situation. Still to come on the program, health workers in Uganda get the go-ahead to start using experimental vaccines for the Ebola disease. Please stay with us.